You're listening to Dodge Movie Podcast. Your hosts are Christi and Mike Dodge, the founders of Dodge Media Productions. We produce films and podcasts, so this is a podcast about films. Join them as they share their passion for filmmaking.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Dodge Movie Podcast. I am especially excited about this film because yours truly was part of the crew. I was fortunate enough to be selected to hold the boom pole, which does not sound like an important job, but I will assure you, not just because I did it, but it is actually, in fact, quite a skill. And you know when it's done incorrectly when the sound goes in and out or they don't quite capture it. I was also given the task as assistant editor and syncing up the sound with the visuals to prepare for the editor. I love this film. This is not a film I would choose to watch. I'm generally not a thriller watcher. I am occasionally, but it has to have like maybe a cast member that I'm really excited about. Getting to see the behind the scenes and how this film was made gave me such an appreciation for it that I felt it was important for us to showcase it. Not only is it a local made film with an award-winning filmmaker, it has a local cast, shot local, set local. Give some local pride and local love to this film. You will have to go to Amazon and pay to rent it. It is not included in Prime, but I guarantee you it is very much worth your money. So the tagline is, "Tonight, the truth isn't the only thing that gets buried." The synopsis is a gripping thriller about a revenge-fueled cat-and-mouse game of imprisonment and interrogation between two Irish immigrants whose mysterious shared past sets them on a collision course with violence.
I'll be honest, I'm also not the biggest fan of thrillers, but I was going to watch this anyway because I know the filmmaker and some of the actors, and I think I know the person who's doing the boom. But anyway, but I did enjoy this film quite a bit, even with that subjective kind of English on the review. I did like it quite a bit.
Yeah. The writer and director is Dustin Morrow. It stars Tom Walton, Amber Stonebreaker, and Todd Van Voris. And gratefully, we are lucky enough to know the director, Dustin Morrow, and asked if he would come on the podcast and do an interview with us so that we could share with you a little bit of the behind the scenes in the mind of a director and how they decide what they do. How do they break down their scenes? How does the story come to life? And what is their process? Unfortunately, we were having some internet issues, so it got a little wonky at times, but I think I was able to clean it up for you guys. You'll notice that it's not our normal audio setup. We weren't using our studio microphones. We were using earbud microphones to do the Zoom call, and then we had to resort to using the computer microphone. So I apologize for the poor audio quality. I think that the contents of the interview, you'll be able to listen past the poor microphones. But we'll be back next week with our studio mic. Here's the interview.
When I've written scripts, it's come from kind of a singular idea. The current film that we're working on, right? I just heard that someone's dad got trapped in an elevator like a dozen times. And that seemed something that was unique and interesting and had merit. So what was your inspiration for Black Pool? Was there a particular thing that you heard or read that started as kind of the germ of the idea?
No, it kind of percolated up for a long time. I mean, I guess you could say that I had wanted to make a film that addressed the conflict in Northern Ireland and specifically sort of how it resonated down through the decades, how it continues to sort of haunt people. Mm-hmm. And I guess if I was going to trace it to one thing, it would be a conversation I had with a friend of mine who grew up in Belfast, was a child sort of just before the Troubles started, but you know, the Troubles that weren't the birth of violence in Northern Ireland. Mm-hmm. And she told me stories of like going to school every day and like throwing rocks at the Catholic kids and having them throw rocks back at her. And she remembered like gunfire in the distance, seeing people off the street and paramilitary presence, British, and the wall and barbed wire. And her cousin was found face down in a ditch. He had been murdered by the IRA.
Oh.
And just these kind of experiences that she had as a really little kid, and sort of talking to her about how those things still echo in her experience as an Irish immigrant here in the United States all these decades later, and how they still sort of haunt her. And I wasn't looking to replicate her experience specifically, but that idea stuck with me. And then it was a matter of just kind of finding the right story to fit that theme. And the other thing, of course, was sort of more practicum driven, which was my interest in working with actors and wanting to make a film that used the actors' faces as the landscape of the movie. And so thinking about simplifying the visual landscape of the film, the background of the film, so that the actors' faces became the dominant visual element in the movie. And also just getting to work with actors very intensely by stripping away a lot of the other things that can distract a film director while you're making a movie, like dealing with gear or weather or locations or extras or, complicated shots or what have you, and just making it sort of 90% about collaborating with the actor. That was an experience I wanted to have for myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I just like genre movies that trap people in small spaces and force them to fight their way out with each other. I'm a big fan of like tight, controlled settings. I could name like a dozen movies that, and I just thought like it'd be interesting to add another film to that grouping.
Well, I can suggest elevators are a great way to trap people.
Indeed, yeah. And there are a host of good trapped in an elevator movies. You guys are entering a firm subgenre.
So you mentioned stripping things down. And one of the things that I think of when I consider the differences between film and theater is the sets are different. Obviously, a physical theater puts some constraints that you maybe don't have if you're on locations. So was that a thing that you attempted to bring into this film, was some of that aspect of the theater and some of the challenges for the actors that they might face more in the theater than they would traditionally in cinema?
That's a good question. In some practical ways, just in how it was made, yes. I asked them to be off book for the entire script from the first day. I mean, that wasn't a huge ask because we were just shooting over the course of like 5 or 6 days. But I wanted them to sort of know the whole arc of their character and be comfortable with it going in, because the movie is so dependent on them and their journeys as characters that their character arcs are really the narrative. They are the story. They're not sort of augmented by any other elements, and so they become really important. And from a practical point of view, we were shooting very fast and on a very low budget, and I just wanted to be able to keep going if we saw an opportunity, or if we had an issue where we had to move the schedule around. I wanted them to be ready to move to another part of the script at a moment's notice if they had to. That's a very unusual thing to ask of actors in film, where usually they only need to know their lines for that given day's shoot. In terms of like their performance style, like I was working with actors with, 2 of my 3 actors were more sort of theater. Their background was more theater. And that's always tricky. These actors were way faster and way better at adjusting to film than most of the theatrical actors that I've worked with in the past.
Mm-hmm.
But there's always a little bit of, I don't know, education's not the right word, but you do have to kind of make them understand what their relationship to the camera is and how the audience is consuming it. The apparatus is different. I don't know if that answers your question, but
Did you know you were going to shoot it in black and white when you wrote it?
I can't remember what stage I made that decision. I think it was certainly before I finished writing it. I don't know that I sat down and started writing thinking it was black and white. But yeah, I mean, part of it again was, part of it's the genre that I thought the black and white worked really well.
Right.
And part of it was that it was going to be a more sort of stripped down aesthetic. And so I thought black and white might lend itself to that in a way that's interesting, that would heighten the reality. And then the last part of it was just thematic, that, I think a character in the movie even refers to how the Troubles, despite what a lot of people think of them, are not black and white. They're all shades of gray. Like a lot of people think of the Troubles as a religious conflict between Catholics and Protestants, but that's actually just a really small part of it. It's also a nationalist conflict. It's an economic conflict. It's a conflict over how people are governed.
Right.
It's more of a political conflict than anything else. And so it's all very messy and it's all very gray. And you can't really say that one side is the good guys and one side is the bad guys, regardless of where your alliances fall. Because it's a very messy conflict. And so I thought the black and white lent itself to that, just thematically. And I always love it when your aesthetic is reflected by is reflected in the narrative itself.
So I was curious about black and white, if you had ever heard anybody talk about my crackpot theory, which is that black and white touches the emotions more directly, because the way our eye works is we see in black and white at night. And my thinking was, for thousands of years, nighttime, anything you saw was either maybe a good thing because you were with your tribe and you were with each other, or a bad thing because it was a predator. So I felt like black and white heightens the emotions. And I don't know if anybody else has ever had that theory, but that was one of the things I thought about when I saw it in black and white.
Yeah, I think that what you're saying is certainly the reason that it works so well in like noir, right? That I think it does. It takes drama into the realm of melodrama if you're using it in that genre. And I thought that worked for the film I was making. I thought it heightened the conflict, as you were saying.
Well, I'm one of those nerds that counts the seconds between things, and I noticed that the video time codes on the small digital camera matched up with the actual runtime of the film. How hard was that to get to match?
It sucked. But yeah, I'm the same way, and when you're an editor and you watch something a million times over, the details become important to you in a way that they aren't to the average viewer.
Right.
So yeah, and I just called you a non-average viewer, Mike.
Normal.
But yeah, like one thing they teach you in film school, or that they should teach you in film school, is that you go with the best take, and like even if there's a minor continuity error, like if it's at the expense of like using the best take, then you should have the error. But it's hard to do. It's really hard to do as an editor. It's hard to let something like that go. So yeah, it wasn't easy. It took a lot of finessing.
So how fulfilling is it that someone noticed?
Well, I will say Mike's the first, or at least he's the first that ever brought it up. But I'm glad that my sweat and tears found an audience.
I was curious, how much collaboration did you and Michael do? Michael Hull, the cinematographer, with this? Did he have ideas that you hadn't even thought of? What was your collaborative relationship with Michael?
Yeah, the first time I met with Michael about the film, I expected all of his questions to have to do with like the choice of camera and what kind of lights were we going to use and where's the location. And instead, all he asked me were story-based questions, which I thought was great. That was when I knew that I had the right guy for the job. He was just thinking narrative, and that's ideally what you want from a cinematographer, is not somebody who's going to be trying to make something to look cool, but somebody who's going to try to make something to service the story. I mean, not to get off on a tangent, but I think that's one of the great misconceptions about cinematography, that like people tend to think of cinematography as like good cinematography as being beautiful, and it certainly can be, but that's really not the case. Great cinematography is cinematography that moves the story forward, which is why I think like the Oscars for cinematography are frequently quite goofy. Like you'll get 5 good nominees, but then because the entire voting body of the Academy votes for it, the prettiest movie is always the movie that ends up winning. And that's because all those people don't understand what good cinematography is or what the best cinematography is. So that was cool. And then beyond that, I told him I had an idea for the aesthetic. I knew I wanted it black and white. I knew I wanted a lot of grain. I knew I wanted it to be kind of gritty. I knew it was going to mostly be, that it was going to have a lot more close-ups of and medium shots of actors than most movies would have. And that I wanted to create this basement that we were going to build in a studio that I wanted to feel kind of like a cage. And so we had all of this, as you might recall, being on the set, we had all this set dressing around the kind of perimeter of the area where the actors did most of their work. And it was stuff like old refrigerators and boxes and chairs and tables and just junk to make it kind of look like a basement. And then if you watch the film, you can't see any of that. And that was really Michael's doing, that he sort of like convinced me that it just worked better if we let it all kind of fall into black. And so that it almost becomes this like, almost like they're not even on Earth. It's just like this other, like once you go into that basement, you're in this other place.
Yeah.
And I think it works. I mean, I think like, I also think that like maybe had we seen some of the set dressing, that it might have felt even more artificial. And so I think it's ultimately good that it ended up the way it did. When we went in and did the pre-light in the studio, we had a bunch of lights, and then Michael just started pulling them out one at a time, and it just kept getting darker and darker and darker. And to the point where like he was lighting a lot of it with just like 1 or 2 lights. And I was like, are you sure? I mean, I know I said I wanted it dark, but like, this is dark. And he's like, trust me. And he's right. And Michael stayed on through the color correction. He did all of the color correcting himself, and he did all of the grain. So he made the grain plate that we ended up using to add film grain to our digital image. And so yeah, he was the look from beginning to end is all him. And he won a couple of awards at film festivals for his photography, which I think for a film that is as stripped down as our aesthetic is, I think that really says something for the job he did.
Yeah. So did you produce detailed like shot lists or storyboards and that he worked from, or was it more of a I want to have, Aiden in the foreground and that kind of discussion with him? I was asking, did you do detailed storyboards, or was your conversation with him more general purpose, like I'd like Aiden in the foreground here, or I see the hammers being in focus, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I had a shot list and I gave it to him. We did adjustments to the lights as I blocked the shots on the day. He and the guy that was assisting him worked really fast in that regard, which is great. I don't storyboard generally unless it's something really complicated. He didn't pre-light for my shots necessarily, though, if that's what you're asking.
Well, I did have another kind of narrative question. So Emma has a dream of a Ferris wheel, and I was wondering if you chose Ferris wheel because Ferris is an Irish family name from Ulster.
No, but an interesting observation.
Mike covers the esoteric
No.
of the film.
Yeah, no, it was purely because, well, it came from, I had an experience where I got stuck on one of those once, or I believe I had a malicious carny was screwing with me and wouldn't let me off, and I got really sick. That's stuck with me ever since I was a kid. But of course, it's used, sort of metaphorically, as Michael says in the movie, because he thinks she's spinning her wheels with him, that she's stuck with him and she can't get away.
And so my other writing question, which I maybe said to you at a screening, but there's a shot that I think you got in Ireland of a crow. And I was wondering if that was intended to reference the Morrigan from Irish mythology that is a foreteller of doom and fate.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know that's what it was called, but yeah, that's absolutely why that's there. It's all foreshadowing. I mean, it's there right in the middle of a montage sequence of shots in Dublin of the seaside and its decay. There's a bunch of trash and graffiti and vandalism, and the bird appears right in the middle of all that for exactly the reasons you mentioned.
Yeah, I really liked how the shots that you got in Dublin and the historical footage was weaved in with the shots that you filmed locally. And so I was wondering, when you were writing the script, did you have that in your mind's eye, envisioning that you would have the macrocosm with the microcosm going back and forth?
Yeah, I didn't know explicitly when I was writing what those shots would be, but I knew they were going to be in the script. I also didn't know exactly, I don't think, I'd have to go back and look at the earliest drafts of the script, but I don't think I knew exactly where they would be placed either in the story, but I always knew I was going to use that material, for a couple of reasons. One, to kind of reflect the state of mind of those characters. One, to give a little historical context to the movie, which doesn't, until the end, explicitly reference the Troubles, and also just to open the movie up visually, to give these sort of occasional spaces where the movie can kind of aesthetically breathe a little, because it is a very claustrophobic film.
Yeah.
I know that you knew going in that your actors were locals and they wouldn't have an accurate Irish accent. So to what degree did you worry about that, right?
Well, I cast my two actors who did Irish accents from the Corrib Theatre here in Portland, which is a theater that does Irish plays and which is run by an Irish woman. And I asked her for references, for recommendations of actors who had flawless Irish accents, but would also obviously be right for the parts.
Yeah.
I was going to cast an Irish actor here. He ended up not being able to do it, but he did come on as a dialect coach to help my actors get their dialects correct, or as correct as they could get them. The thing with Tom, who plays the lead role, I very much wanted his accent to have flattened. Oh, okay. Which actually worked to our advantage since he's not Irish. It took a little bit of the heat off of him, but I wanted that because, part of his character is that he's sort of afraid of, or feels like he's losing some of his Irish identity, and losing some of his accent, I think, would be alarming to him. So that was totally intentional.
Yeah, that's interesting. Now that you say that, I realize that when he calls his sister, her accent is still very strong.
Yep.
Yeah. And that would be a constant reminder to him that he's losing his when he hears hers.
And because he delivers the dialogue of what time it is, I assume she was in Ireland.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, I have a couple just quick questions, and then hopefully I have some smart, deep questions.
Yeah.
But is a hammer just a hammer, or was there some symbolism or like a reason why you chose, Michael, to have a hammer versus like a knife or a gun or?
No, well, it is. There's a obviously he doesn't have this planned. Not that he couldn't be a gun owner, but I felt somebody who had experienced that kind of traumatic violence as a young person, traumatic gun violence, would maybe not be a gun owner. I also didn't think that the character of Emma was one that would have a gun in their house. To the degree that the Troubles, there's a strong kind of socioeconomic aspect of it, I thought it would be interesting to have the Aiden character, to have Todd's character be better off than Tom's character. You know, that he's this best-selling author, and that Tom's character is unemployed. And it's not an explicit pitting of white collar and blue collar classes, but I think that that's echoed a little bit in how Tom is dressed in the film and the fact that he wields a hammer as his weapon. So
I noticed that the pocket, what I call the marsupial pouch on Tom's hoodie, the corners had been pulled away.
Yeah.
And my thought was that just simply to show that he had to keep this sweatshirt because he couldn't afford to replace it? Or was there something more about that choice of having the wardrobe like that?
Yeah, it was more just I wanted him to look ragged.
Yeah.
The part of the problem with Tom is that, and I hope he doesn't listen to this because I'm about to compliment him, is that he's a pretty good looking guy.
Yeah.
And he's a big guy. He's like 6'3" or something. He's kind of tall. He's built. And it's hard to make Tom look too run down. So any little thing I could do without kind of making it kind of ridiculous, we did. So yeah, I didn't want him to have like holes in his jeans or anything like that. But I thought like if his sweatshirt looked like it had seen better days, then that might tell you a little bit about him and his mindset. I like this idea that he would have gone out to a bar wearing that, like out in public. Like that appealed to me.
And so was it intentional to put Aiden's character in a white shirt?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So as somebody who doesn't feel very strong about my writing skills, and as a new like filmmaker and storyteller, I am impressed with how good writers weave in exposition. And so it's not so much as a question as it's a compliment. I liked how you used the podcast to give the audience exposition as he's listening to her interview Aiden. And then also the kitchen scene, which is really, really tense, where he's explaining what he did at the bar and how he gave him the sleeping pill, and it's him, and just that really tense scene in the kitchen with him and Emma is another good, place where I felt like the exposition was well delivered without it being too much. That's why you're the Emmy Award winning filmmaker and I'm just the student.
Yeah. Well, you're right. There's other stuff. I don't mean you're right about that. I mean, you're right to notice. You're right. Well, you're right. I am quite the genius. No, you're right about, using those devices for exposition. My thing with exposition is always, if you can put it in there in a way that the method for which you're delivering it also serves another purpose, then that's the best way to do it. Like you can have, you could put exposition on like a newspaper or, as a voiceover or whatever. And that's all it will function as. But if you can find a way to deliver it so that it also then narratively means something, then that's the best way to do it. So in those cases, the podcast, what I was most interested in was seeing Tom's character listening to it. So having him be clearly tortured as he lays there in bed, listening to this guy who he thinks is the guy who killed his dad. Mm-hmm. And then using it at the end again, kind of like a bookend where he hears the rest of that interview and kind of realizes what Aiden has been living with as well, that Tom is not the only one that's kind of been in a prison, so to speak, for all this time. Yeah. So the thing about the kitchen scene is I really like it in films when stories just spill out of people. Right. And I feel like another filmmaker might have shown that material to the audience, like cut to him interacting with Aiden in the bar, and then cut to him going to the bathroom and having a little meltdown. But I thought about that because that wouldn't have been hard to shoot. We wouldn't even have needed sound. But I ultimately decided not to do it because I just thought that what that scene is really about is about Emma's being confronted with all this stuff. It doesn't even really matter how Michael and Aiden come to be together in this basement. In fact, if you think about it, it amounts to like a kind of a ridiculous coincidence. What that scene is about is not not the backstory, not the exposition that he's putting out there. He needs to put that out there because the audience wants to know, but it's really about Emma's reaction to it. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of fun sometimes to just see somebody tell a story it doesn't always need to be illustrated.
We have been listening to Rum Rebellion since we watched the film last weekend. And it's a great album. Was it Black Water? Black Water is the album we've been listening to. Uh-huh. The second song in the film by them, it had a music video kind of feel. And I know that you've edited music videos. You even founded a music video film festival. Was that intentional? Did you fall into that rhythm? Or was that just kind of, just movie editing and it just happens to kind of feel like a music video?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for it not to, right? Because it stands out from the rest of the film. I mean, I hope people aren't really thinking music video when they watch it, but I understand why they might.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I thought it worked. In fact, I mean, I don't think it was that song, but there's another one of their songs and you're interweaving the archival footage and I think possibly some of the footage you shot and then footage, maybe it's even like the scene where Michael and Aiden are fighting, but the music, the Rum Rebellion song really intensifies the tension that is happening. I mean, I thought that all the music worked so well with the film, and I don't want to say another character, but very much influenced the narrative.
Yeah, I mean, I knew I wanted Irish punk, which is like my favorite subgenre of music. I listened to a lot of it. I wanted that kind of punk ethos. I thought that the grit of a punk soundtrack would add to the film. I think it's really interesting when you use one artist for a film. It almost becomes like an additional character, like you said.
Well, that was our interview. We are so grateful to Dustin Morrow to give us his time and answer our questions and explain his process when he approaches a movie. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. Next week, we will be kicking off April with chase movies, and our first film will be The French Connection, and we are releasing that the week of my birthday because I will be the same age as The French Connection and proud of it. I've earned these 50 years of wrinkles and gray hairs. Have a great week, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to Dodge Movie Podcast with Christi and Mike Dodge of Dodge Media Productions. To find out more about this podcast and what we do, go to dodgemediaproductions.com. Subscribe, share, leave a comment, and tell us what we should watch next. Dodges never stop, and neither do the movies.